What's up, YouTube? As you can probably tell from the title, I played Dimir Shadow in a modern online qualifier, and well, we're going to show off some of the matches, show how the deck did against some of the elite competition that Magic Online has to offer. So, if you haven't seen Dimir Shadow, if you've been living under a rock or just like new to the channel, whatever the case may be, Dimir has been like absolutely a blast for me since the release of MH3. We've got a bunch of really new cool cards to play with, including Nethergoyf, Tamiyo Inquisitive Student, a bunch of stuff like that. So it's really cool to say, oh, this deck's kind of working in like leagues against some of the random stuff that you might run into there. But how does it do in a premier event when you're running into Nadu and Jeskai and Eldrazi and energy decks and whatnot? That's like the real what's the word for it? Not like testing stick, testing meter. You get the idea. You just want to know how you do against the decks that you're expecting to see at your next like RCQ or RC or whatever the case may be. So that's what we aim to do today. First, we'll go over the deck list and we'll get into the matches, whatnot. The deck list, if you've been watching any of my previous videos, you'll recognize the deck list like right away. The way I've got it divided out here is first row is all of our mana sources. So Sink into Stupor could be a mana source, could be a spell. I like to be conservative and say, hey, this is probably going to be a mana source a reasonable amount of the time. Though there are plenty of times we get to hard cast it. Second row is our card draw, our card filtering. Mishra's Bauble, pretty known quantity in Shadow decks, but works even better now that we have cards like Tamiyo and Nethergoyf, letting us set up extra draws on our turn, letting us get an artifact in the yard for Nethergoyf. We've got 4 copies of Street Wraith, almost the exact same as Bauble, extra draws for Tamiyo, extra card types for Nethergoyf, life loss for Shadow. We've got 4 copies of Preordain. You're sensing a theme with these draw cards, right? Like, draw extra cards on your turn for Tamiyo. Extra card types for Nethergoyf. Help you find ways to lose life for Shadow. Find your counter spells, whatever the case may be. Second row is our threats. And I really love that this goes in like a 12, 11, 10, 1 kind of pattern. Or 10, 9, even though it's not the mana curve. But our threats, 3 copies of Tamiyo Inquisitive Student. I get a lot of people asking, like, if you like Tamiyo so much, why not 4 copies of Tamiyo? And the reason is, well, 3 reasons. First off is the fact that Tamiyo is not a card that I want to see multiple copies of in every match. Usually that's kind of where my 4 of sit is, hey, I want to see this card. I want to see it often. I need it. It's a vital part of my game plan, which is where you have like Counterspell, Thoughtseize, Nethergoyf, Street Wraith and Bauble, Preordain. Like, I want to see these cards as often as possible. Tamiyo is great as the first copy, like phenomenal for the first copy. Solid for the second copy, but usually the first one, you don't have too much of a problem protecting and flipping, depending on if it's a matchup that you're really trying to protect and flip it. And then the third copy is just like completely dead. So you never want to see 3 Tamiyo in a game. The 4 of Shadow, self-explanatory, namesake card of the deck. The 4 Nethergoyf, this has been, to me, the best proactive threat that we've had in addition to Shadow for non-green Shadow decks in ever. Like, a lot of people swear by the frog, the psychic frog. A lot of people are still on Murktide. Personally, for me, the proactivity in Nethergoyf like throws everything else out the water. This is a threat that you can play out turn 1 is like a 1-2 with a fetch land and feel confident that it's going to get up to a 3-4, 4-5. Or you can wait, save it for after like a Wraith, a Bauble, a Thoughtseize, and just play it out as a 4/5. But it gives you that ability to get on the board early and often, great in multiples. Yeah, it's weak to Graveyard Hate, but when has Murktide not been weak to Graveyard Hate? And the fact that you don't have to, like, discard stuff like you do with Psychic Frog to get value out of it. Just being a big, beefy beater body is good enough on its own. The counterspell slot is this 10, this 4th row here. The 4 copies of counterspell, 3 Drown in the Lock, Force Negation, 2 Stubborn Denial. Again, kind of a funny like little 4-3-2-1 pattern, but 4 counterspell I think is like the backbone of the deck. You got to remember that this is a control deck, splashing shadow and efficient win conditions. It's not like a shadow tempo-y style deck with spell pierces and things like that. Like, you are trying to present hard counter spells for your opponents. So counter spell, Drown in the Lock late in the game, Stubborn Denial if you have a ferocious threat, Force Negation, all are like unconditional. Your thing is gone. Not your thing is gone unless you pay X. I get Stubborn Denial if you're not ferocious, but you're expecting by the time you're stubbing something, you've got ferocious. But it's just like, get that out of here any stage of the game. The last row, Dismember, 4 Fatal Push, 4 Thoughtseize is kind of like our disruption package. Kill off some stuff that does manage to sneak through the counter spells, like the early game creatures. Thoughtseize to get a better idea of what our opponent's up to, as well as maybe strip them from a key card like a Nadu, like a Wrath of the Skies. In the sideboard, 3 copies of Consigned to Memory for any of the Eldrazi Tron shenanigans, 2 Flusterstorm. It is great against Ruby Storm. I also really, really love it against Jeskai Control. I'll bring it in against Tron variants because being able to Flusterstorm like a Kozilek's Command or an All Is Dust through the breach, really necessary. 2 copies of Stern Scolding for any of the small creature matchups. Prowess, Burn, Boros Energy, Wizards. 2 Force Negation. I didn't really talk about the main deck one, but Force Negation is kind of this safety valve card. It says, oh, if I'm on the draw against like Eldrazi or against Tron and they have an Ugin's Labyrinth Chalice, I have a potential out to that. I have a way to interact. It's also really good with cards like Tamiyo and Nethergoyf that you want to play out on turn 1 and protect on your opponent's turn 1, especially like when you're on the play. Don't give them that tempo advantage. So Force really acts to fight over Prismatic Ending, Galvanic Discharge, something on your opponent's turn, so you can keep your threat around. 3 copies of Toxic Deluge, Sweeper of Choice, great against Boros, great against Nadu, great against any small go wide creature deck, Merfolk, Elves, whatever. 1 Nihil Spellbomb for Grave Hate. It is a little awkward with Drown in the Lock, but still working on that slot. Could be Surgical Extraction if you really wanted to target one specific thing. But usually when I have Grave Hate, I'm kind of wanting to nuke the entire graveyard, not just take out one little piece. And then 2 Disruptor Flute. I'm not going to lie with the Disruptor Flutes. They were supposed to be Break the Ices. I registered for the event with this list that's on screen. And then had a change of heart, and I was going to swap out like the Disruptor Flutes, a Flusterstorm, maybe one of the Forces for some stuff like another Spell Bomb, a couple Break the Ice, and some other card I don't remember. And I dropped from the event, re-entered, and it submitted my first deck list again. And I didn't notice until like sideboarding of round 1, and was like, oh, dang. So hope we don't run into too many Tron decks. Either way, I know that intro was a bit long-winded, but hopefully gives you some insight to some of the card choices. let's get into the actual matches. Let's go showcase what Dimir Shadow is all about. Maybe convince you to pick it up for your next F&M, for your next RCQ. And then, as always, down below in the description of the video, I'll have a link to my current Dimir deck list. It might not be the one on screen, but it's whatever I'm currently comfortable with. Link to the Twitter in case you want to know when a live stream's happening. Link to the Discord in case you want to come talk Shadow, anything Shadow related or non-Shadow related. Link to the Twitch so when a live stream does happen, you won't miss it. And deck list, Twitter, Twitch, Discord. Yeah, that's it. Otherwise, have like bookmarks, chapters down below so you can go look at a certain part of the video if you want to. All right, so we're on the play. Game 1, match 1. We've got some mana sources. We've got some interaction, so pretty easy sneak. Wish we had a threat, but at the same time, we've got Undercity Sewers to kind of filter. We've got a Street Wraith to draw an additional card. Can't ask for much more outside of a threat. But really, any of our threats are live. We've got 8 points of life loss in our hand with the fetch land, the sink into super, and the Street Wraith. So that means Shadow is live as early as turn 2. If we find a Nethergoyf, we've got Fatal Push, Street Wraith, our fetch land. So we're looking at a 3/4 Nethergoyf. If we find Tamiyo, then we've got a Wraith. Maybe we can find another way to draw a card, or we could have like turn 1, Tamiyo, turn 2, crack a clue, cycle a Wraith, flip it. Whatever the case may be. We've got options. So let's just go fetch land, pass. We want to keep up our mana in case our opponent plays a 1-drop we want to interact with. And that tempo advantage is a pretty big deal, which is why you see us shock in or bolt in a sink into stupor instead of going for the Undercity Sewers. Because like our opponents just showed us they're on an aggressive red deck. So the last thing I want to do is tap off of like my counter spell or my Drowning Lock here and risk a big chunk of damage that I don't have to take. And since I've got 2 of these 2-mana interactive spells, I can always like cast 1 this turn, wait for 1 next turn. Opponent's gonna show a Slick Shot Show Off. Throw it off into exile. We do pick up a couple threats here, so now feeling pretty solid about our board state. Gonna counterspell that Slick Shot instead of going for the removal side of Drowning the Lock. The Pro Tour had a couple Prowess decks near the top tables, one of which was like hyper aggressively slanted Gruul variation with Scale Up, Blossoming Defense, Snakeskin Veil, stuff like that. So if I've got the option to counter something like a Slick Shot Show Off instead of going for a removal spell, I'm probably going to take that line because I don't want to risk getting blown out by like a Blossoming Defense into a Lava Dart or something for some huge chunk of damage. For the most part, like Swift Spear and Soulscar Mage are good, but I'm not quite as afraid of those as I am of like Slick Shot Show Off. So I also just noticed that this this display, minimize that just a little bit. The display didn't keep like the card count in their side. But also let's rewind just a tad. So if you didn't see this, opponent goes for a Monstrous Rage. I responded with cycling a Street Wraith so that they'd have to do more to get rid of my Nethergoyf. They had a Lightning Bolt to go upstairs to grow their Swift Spear past the Nethergoyf again. I went for the Drowning Lock to try to take out the Soulscar Mage, and their last card was a Blossoming Defense to protect it. So I did end up just like going down to dead. The joys of prowess. I stand by my statement that I'm not as afraid of Swift Spear and Soul Scar as I am of Slick Shot. That doesn't mean they can't just make a really big Swift Spear and Soul Scar mage. Sideboarding against Prowess. Taking out all the Wraiths. I think the Wraiths... Street Wraith against like Burn and Prowess, I think is the only free cut. A lot of people will board out like all their Street Wraiths and all their Thought Seizes and call it free because they all say lose life. But at the end of the day, if your Thought Seize takes away like a lightning bolt, you've netted a life. If it takes away a creature, you've probably netted multiple life beyond just the 2 that Thought Seize loses you. So those cards are very, very good in these matchups, from keeping your opponent off of critical mass to dealing with creatures kind of proactively, which is 99% of the game plan in the matchup, is just saying like, hey, you have some amount of creatures, I want you to have less of them. So here we got a bobble ourselves, shuffle that away. Really just looking for some more interaction, looking for some fatal pushes, for some more drowning locks, something. Kind of kill off this channeler before they're able to put a couple spells into it. Picking up fatal push, very, very good there. So Tamiyo will kind of stand on the ground, or stand her ground. And I'm completely fine, like, throwing away Tamiyo in a position like this. Because if Tamiyo dies, they had to have wasted some number of spells on it. In which case, I just get to follow up with a Shadow. Keep a counter spell on top, keep myself from, you know, dying. And then I'm going to hold this fetch land, or this shock land in hand. It's basically because I don't know if I want to shock yet or not. I don't want to play it tapped, and then my opponent like hits for 2, and I go down to 14, and now I can't put out my my Shadow if I need to. But when I say like the game plan in this matchup is keep creatures off the board, I literally mean anything that you possibly can find that says like kill a creature or counter a creature is your highest priority. You don't need to worry about finding a win condition for a while. You just need to keep their stuff off of the board. So now I've got a Shadow plus a Dismember. We'll go for the Dismember here. I could have done this on my turn. Possibly play around something like that Blossoming Defense. Also could have Flusterstormed there. Got really, really lucky top decking another Shadow. But even if I Flusterstormed, they would have still outgrown my Shadow with the Soul Scar. I think it was going up to a 6-7. So I figured saving the Flusterstorm is probably the better option. Well, I definitely don't want an Underworld Breach resolving. And I definitely don't want an Assault Strobe resolving. So, thankfully, we saved that Flusterstorm. But I will 100% admit, like, this game all completely revolved around lucky top deck of a second Shadow. So, here's another Goyf. Luckily, most of these Prowess lists are like only running one copy of Underworld Breach, or the new Gruul lists are only running one copy. So as soon as that's done, like the explosive potential for my opponent kind of goes out the window. And on to game 3, got some interaction, got a fatal push, have some draw manipulation, and then like when I see that my opponent didn't play a 1-drop and I find the second fatal push, my immediate thought is already like, okay, this game's over. Like, I've got answers to 3 guys right here. I've got preordained to try to find another answer. I just picked up a Stern Scolding for this Slick Shot in Exile. Like, good luck. Good luck. Get to convert a Flusterstorm on a Seek the Beast. Like, chef's kiss. Sitting at a high and mighty 19 life. So, like, Tameo, Nethergoyf, both would be excellent pickups. See another Fatal Push on top of our library. Well, I'm not going to turn that down. Like, this is my game plan. I will gladly play Drago in this scenario. A lot of not much going on. Truly riveting, thrilling gameplay, I know. But this does really favor us, since they need very specific cards to interact. Like, first of all, they have to find creatures. Second, those creatures have to resolve through Counterspell and Drown, which is a big ask. And then after those creatures resolve, they have to have just like a hand chock full of Blossoming Defenses and Snakeskin Veils and stuff to get around the Fatal Pushes. So that's a very, very, very specific set of circumstances that, like, has to happen. Yeah, opponent's gonna scoop it up there. 1-0 for the Shadows. On to round number 2. Pretty good opening hand. We are on the draw, but we've got some interaction. Got Thoughtseize, got a Clock in Nethergoyf. Lush Portico means like 99% Bant Nadu. Definitely the deck on everybody's radar right now since the Pro Tour. Before we get farther into the match, I know we've got people calling for like emergency ban of Nadu, and personally I'm in that camp of like, I don't think this card is too powerful that Modern can't adjust, but I think that the gameplay is atrocious. It drags out events, it wastes a bunch of time. It's got the second Sunrise feel to it of like, hey, this just kind of goes on. And eventually you're going to start seeing people like quicken their combo with more Outriders on core, and all of a sudden you're going to have, well, in response to you comboing, I'm going to combo and take 30 minutes. And it's just not good gameplay to watch. Like, for anybody that watched the Pro Tour, it was horrible to watch that all day. If anybody didn't watch the Pro Tour, then count yourselves lucky. But for the most part, I felt kind of favored against Nadu with Shadow. So it's not like I want to ban the deck out of fear of it. It's just, I don't think it's the kind of deck we need to have in the format. So they immediately find a fetch land for the Spring Heartland Tuco, where we are able to take out the Nadu. They've got a Quarter Calling, so I've got to kind of... this was, I think, a mistake on my part. My thought was they fetch up another land, they make a token off the Nantuko, and they go up to 3 bodies... 3 lands. I can Stubborn Denial if they don't find another land, and kind of take that approach. I kind of forgot that they could just fetch up Dryad Arbor if they wanted to, which they happen to just naturally find it, which is even worse for me because now they have naturally found Dryad Arbor. The Haywire Might that they get off the Urza Saga that I didn't really think about either, but you get the idea. And they still have the fetch land, so now they can cord for 3, keep up open mana. I could have just kept the counter spell up instead of going for the Tamiyo, but I just was not thinking about like the amount of bodies that they could get on the board. Sideboarding against Nadu. Force Negation, Stubborn Denial are like my big, these are coming out cards. Drown I usually trim on because of Endurance. Tamiyo because it's not really... Tamiyo's good, but Tamiyo's not interacting early. That being said, you could keep in Tamiyo as like a flip, buy back a Thoughtseize, buy back a Counterspell, and I think that's completely reasonable. But for me, I had the 3 Toxic Deluges I wanted to get in. I had the 2 Stern Scoldings and the 2 Disruptor Flutes. So Tamiyo is kind of my last, I'll cut this spot. So less so that Tamiyo is bad, more so that I just had more stuff I wanted to bring in. Opening hand, no lands, ship it back. Second hand, here's removal, and hope it's enough. I say hope it's enough. Like, I think the part that people kind of forget in this particular matchup is if you're just aggressive, play to the board, play proactively, you have a reasonable time against Nadu just with that. They don't have really any interaction. Maybe like a couple Dismembers or something. Maybe a Skyclave Apparition they can cord for. But for the most part, the deck is not very hateful. So pick up this Disruptor Flute, so I'll go ahead and play out the Shadow. That way, if they do manage to top deck like a Shuko, I can Disruptor Flute the Shuko. Instead, they decide that they're going to play the waiting game. So I'm like, all right, I'm just going to fire off Disruptor Flute. If they cord for a Nadu here, then I'll name Shuko with the Flute and untap and Toxic Deluge away the board. Works perfectly fine for me. No harm, no foul. If they don't name, or if they don't cord for a Nadu, I could name Urza Saga if I wanted to, but it doesn't really stop much. But my opponent in response decides to go ahead and make a token. So now I think, okay, well, they have double Chord of Calling in hand with only 2 green sources. They're about to lose a land off Urza Saga going away. What if I just name Chord of Calling? Like, what if I strand these 2 cards in hand? Because Disruptor Flute has the hidden mode of not only stifling an ability, but it makes spells with the chosen name like 2 or 3 more to cast. So I'll name Chord of Calling, Toxic Deluge away your board, and now you're like 2 lands off of even casting a chord if you had the 3rd green and if one of your lands wasn't leaving here. So opponent's going to make a Construct, get a Haywire Might, which is a little annoying since they can take out the Disruptor Flute, but at the same time, if they do spend a turn like this taking out the Flute, then they still have to find a green source, and I'm just going to keep throwing threats at them. Even if they find a green source, that's cord for 2, not cord for Nadu. Find a Shuko and a land. So we'll crack in here with the doofuses, pass the turn, hold up sync to plan on sinking a Nadu, sink a cord. Anything we can possibly target that'll keep them from getting Nadu on this board. So, good showing there, game 2. And then game 3, on the draw, but we do have ways to lose life. We have Thoughtseize, we have threats. Take away a Springheart Nantuko. Leave him with a Cord and another halfling. Get down a Nethergoyf. If they do want a Cord, they're just cording for 2, which isn't the end of the world. Unless they just, you know, top deck a Nadu. So now they have Cord, which means I cannot tap off of this counter spell. I've got to be able to interact. If they find a land and they want a Cord for a Nomad Encore, I have to be able to fight over that. Looks like they're going for the Cord right away. I don't really know what they're getting at X equals 3. Not that I plan on finding out. Either way, here's a bunch of threats. Hold up Disruptor Flute and Counterspell. If they find Shuko, then I'll just Disruptor Flute the Shuko. Since they found Outrider, I'll just Disruptor Flute that. Honestly, before right now, I thought Outrider was 4 mana instead of 3. So that makes the Court of Calling for 3 make sense. But, okay. Here, I'm not dead on the Crackback, regardless of what I attack with. So I decide to attack with a full squad because I drew the Street Wraith. And now if my opponent does just forego blocks, I can cycle Street Wraith and they're actually dead. It grows my Shadow to a 6/6 and it grows both of my Nethergoyfs to 4/5s. So 4, 4, 6 is 14 exactly. If they do block with like a Nadu on a Nethergoyf, I can cycle the Wraith and that's amazing for me because I just take out the Nadu. So any block realistically is like a good block from my side. They're not killing off multiple things regardless of how they block. So they just go for the halfling, or they just go for the halfling chump block. I decide not to cycle the Street Wraith because there's a good chance that if they went for the halfling block this turn, they might want to do the same thing next turn, in which case I could blow them out with cycling the Street Wraith. They do top deck a Shuko that we immediately counterspell. And now it's game over. Like, all they've got is a halfling back to block. I've got enough life to cycle the Street Wraith. I go ahead and show them that, and they scoop it up. So regardless of what they block, I have a lethal attack coming through, and we are on to a 2-0 start. Good hand on the play. We've got Tamiyo. We've got Force and Negation to protect it. Talk about sequencing. Sorry, I lost my words there for a second. So I could play out Tamiyo on turn 1 and plan on forcing whatever my opponent does. But because I have the Preordain and the Street Wraith, I know I can flip Tamiyo turn 2 if I can strip my opponent of some interaction. So Thought Seizing on turn 1 opens up the possibility of me just going like Tamiyo, Preordain, cycle Street Wraith turn 2, flip Tamiyo. And if I find another blue source, I've got Force and Negation up, which is pretty likely, seeing as how I'm seeing 4 new cards with Draw for Turn, Preordain, Scries, Street Wraith cycle, so up to 4 new cards. So most decks I don't think are going to be able to deal with Thoughtseize on 1, Tamiyo on 2 with Force Negation backup to potentially take away a disruptive element. But it turns out my opponent's just on Tron, so nothing we say really matters. And this is really where I think Tamiyo shines. Like, a Shadow here would obviously be really good. A Nethergoyf would be pretty solid. But Tamiyo just gives you, like, this win condition that is difficult to interact with. You can keep all your mana up. It's hard to describe. It's just doing a lot of really good stuff for not a lot of investment. Like, your investment is drawing to more counter spells. Your investment isn't playing out a threat and not like cycling through your deck. So Tamiyo's ready to ult next turn. Opponent goes for a Kozilek's command. We've got a counterspell because I've got Force Negation on their turn. I am not afraid of going down to 0 cards because if Tamiyo ults, game's effectively over. Which is what we have here. We see a Stone Brain on top of their library. I did not find a Thoughtseize. I gotta say that in here because if I had a Thoughtseize, I would have just played it out to make sure the coast was clear for these shadows. But I didn't. Just have a bunch of counter spells and set up for the double shadow kill the turn after. And boom. Chalk up that win to Tamiyo. Get to go into the sideboarding against Tron. Sideboard playing against Tron, I think has been really clean. Like the Fatal Pushes, Drowns, Dismembers come out. The Fluster Storms, extra Force Negations, Disruptor Flute / Break the Ice, and the Consigned to Memories come in. And it usually ends up being like 8 for 8. Maybe 9 for 9, depending on your sideboard. And Consigned to Memory is like an absolute house in this matchup. And it's got 5 mana available. I thought about letting this map go, but like they didn't play the map the turn before, so I'm assuming that that was their draw for turn. They didn't start on Tron land, so I'm assuming they don't have natural Tron. So consigning the map feels like it's got a reasonable chance of keeping them off of anything impactful here. Go ahead and flip the Tamiyo. And this is one of these situations where like I feel so much more confident flipping Tamiyo because I have Force Negation back up. Force Negation going a long way to make sure I can like tap out my first 2 or 3 turns, be proactive, get on the board, don't have to hold up counterspell. Thoughtseize away all his dust, so their last card is Beseiju. I've got a 3-turn clock with Shadow, I've got a counterspell, I've got a Disruptor Flute if they find like a Karn or something. And then I decide instead of going for the Tamiyo ult, like I'm just going to get back Consigned to Memory. Like, you're going to have 2 cards to beat double counter spell, including counter for, like, a triggered ability. Say, a Devourer cast trigger. And opponent cannot overcome our counter magic. On to match 4. Yeah, match 4. Sitting at 3-0. Okay. Let's talk about this mulligan decision. Because I'm sure people are going to be outraged in the comments, like, "Oh, you're throwing away the match. What are you doing?" So, opening hand, we've got a Shadow, but we've really got like nothing going on. I've got a whole bunch of reactive cards. I don't have near enough life loss to get Shadow online. No Thoughtseize, Nethergoyf, Tamiyo, anything like that. So, to me, pretty easy ship, just in the sense of not being proactive, game 1 in the blind. The second hand has double Street Wraith, has Tamiyo, doesn't have a land. I am aware that it doesn't have a land at the time of keeping this. The problem is I can't really go down to 5 on the play in the blind. I need to keep a hand that has some potential of winning on the mulligan, and this hand has the potential as long as I find like 1 land. So in my mind, I gotta keep it. I've got game in 2 and 3 to work with, but either way, don't find the land. And at this point, I'm just like, I'm just trying to see what they're on. And Thundering Falls could have led to like Murktide. It could have led to a blue-red control variant. It could have led to Jeskai. But as soon as I see Manamo, then I know immediately, okay, it's Jeskai with the one ring. Could be blue-red with the one ring, but all odds for the most part are pointing to Jeskai. I think Javier Dominguez's Pro Tour list was running Manamo, so that's kind of what I'm assuming at this point. They probably have a pretty reasonable idea of what I'm running, but I don't think they can make any for sure assumptions. But more than likely, I've kind of given myself away with the double Street Wraith and Bauble. Oh well. Sideboarding against Jeskai Control. Jeskai Control is a matchup that I don't think is that horrible. And for the most part, that's because a lot of these lists have kind of foregone Solitude for Galvanic Discharge. And it's a whole lot easier to just grow a Shadow past Discharge range than it is dealing with the Solitude. So, yeah. Be aggressive. Don't worry about like Bolt, Snap, Bolt, because a lot of them aren't even running Bolt. Sideboarding. I think in this case I brought out like few spot removal spells. I didn't know for sure if they were on like a non-wizards build, so I didn't want to cut all of my fatal pushes. So I think I ended up keeping 2 in just to hedge against like Tamiyo and Snapcaster. Brought in Flusterstorms for sure. Brought in, what did I bring in? Flusterstorm. Oh, Force Negations as extra ways of dealing with like the One Ring or, something similar. Force really good for dealing with Snapcaster targets. Wrath of the Skies, Galvanic Iteration, or Galvanic Discharge. When you've got a hand of double Nethergoyf, looking at your opponent playing a turn 1 island is like the best feeling in the world. Because, hey, you're not interacting with my Nethergoyf. I've got a chance to set it up, get it out of like discharge range. In this case, get another Nethergoyf down. You don't have the mana yet to Wrath the Skies. Or you have the mana, you don't have the energy yet. So we're just going to set up with the expectations that you're probably going to go for turn 3 Wrath the Skies. And I'm just going to try to blow that out as much as possible. Hey look, it's a turn 3 Wrath the Skies. And that'll grow both of my Nethergoyfs. So when I talk about like Nethergoyf being a really good early proactive threat, this is exactly what I'm referring to. Like, hey, I've just got 2 1-mana 4/5s, and you gotta do something about them. And there we go. We've got. They could have had another Wrath the Skies plus like Spell Pierce, who would have had Force Negation for the Wrath plus Drown in the Lock for the 1-mana interactive spell to protect the Wrath. So, good for us there. I don't think they're playing Flusterstorm. Yeah, on the draw, game 3. We don't necessarily have this Tamiyo flip. Depends on what our Bauble finds us into. But we do have Force Negation to protect the Tamiyo. We've got Thoughtseize if we go back to our turn. Flusterstorm if we go back to our turn. We just kind of want to find some lands. So, right here, I went for the Thoughtseize. I think I should have just gone for flipping the Tamiyo. The reason being is my opponent had their turn 1 with red mana and didn't cast something to get rid of the Tamiyo. So that should be like immediate, oh, they don't have Galvanic Discharge. And if that's the case, then I should just take advantage of flipping Tamiyo here and start ticking up. It's like they know I have Wraith and Bauble and stuff, so I have free draw effects if they try to like get me on my turn. But I definitely should have just gone for the flip and started ticking up. I know they would have a Flage hit the Tamiyo for 3, but I could Thoughtseize. In hindsight, I could Thoughtseize the second Flage. But I know they're more... I wouldn't know they'd have the Flage because I didn't Thoughtseize. But you can make a reasonable assumption that if your opponent kept a hand of 7, doesn't have an answer for Tamiyo on 1, they probably have something to do. In this case, Flage. But that would have definitely gotten me out of some trouble here, because it would have been like ping the Tamiyo down to 1, which they top deck that Galvanic Discharge. I would have had the Discharge covered. They would have pinged Tamiyo down to 1 with that first Flage. Thoughtseize would have taken second Flage, probably like Wrath the Skies or something, or Subtlety. Now, third Flage, I can't do much about. So, it's kind of a, oh, this decision's a little sketchy. Doesn't actually matter in the end. Here's just third Flage. But I found a Shadow. So we know Wrath of the Skies, Subtlety, Unknown, Flage in the yard, Flage to the face, tapped land. So Wrath of the Skies, Subtlety is their hand. Attack in just to see if we can get the chump block, which we do not. So now we have to sink into Stupor, the Flage. Probably should have just done it on their upkeep, but I figured I'd wait because I had Flusterstorm, I had Force Negation if I needed them, if they did end up having like a counter spell. I didn't notice until this part that they only had 2 white, so they can't Flage plus Wrath. And it's really funny because I think that lost me the game. I think them not having triple white just like lost me the game, because I think they would have just gone like Wrath, I counter it and they Flage, or Flage, I let it resolve, then they Wrath, I counter the Wrath, and I've just got a Shadow that's killing them in 2 turns, and they don't have enough stuff in the yard to get Flage back. But I think as soon as like everybody realized, oh, they only have 2 white and they can't Flage plus Wrath, now instead of Wrathing, we're gonna Subtlety. And that is exactly what happened, and that is like the exact line that my hand cannot deal with. I can deal with the Wrath all day. I don't care about the 1 Flage ping, but Subtlety flying over and then the Flage ping is enough to get me there, or to get them there. There's Flage, and I am dead. So, yeah, it's not too often that your opponent's mana woes cost you the game, but I definitely think that was one of them. Also, big props to my last opponent there, McWright. They did end up making top 8 of the showcase, or of the qualifier. So, really cool there. Besides that, on to round 5, we're up against Tron again, or some Tron variant. When I'm organizing my thoughts about Tron decks, it's usually, is this like an expedition map, try to get Tron deck? Or is this a, I've got Tron lands, but I'm really about just getting 2 mana lands, like the Ugin's Labyrinth and Eldrazi Temple. And this, I'm assuming, is actual Tron, where the last one was more more Eldrazi. Alright. Opponent's got a copy of the One Ring, which is unfortunate, but I kind of can't play around it. I need to be proactive. I need to get on the board. I could counterspell the Expedition map, but they're going to have, like, with them drawing 3 cards off the ring next turn, I'm really assuming that they're going to have Tron regardless. Now it becomes my goal to stop them from doing anything with Tron. So this Kozilek's command, really unfortunate on my side. I was kind of expecting to hit them, and then they would draw like a Devourer or something and cast it and exile one of my shadows. I'd counter the Devourer, attack him with my other shadow for lethal, or just have them die to the One Ring. But because they were able to find the Kozilek's command, they could potentially exile one of my shadows, make me use up my counter spell, and just kind of run away with a second copy of the One Ring. Now, we did have some unfortunate draws there earlier. As you can see, we've got 7 lands available, 5 in play, 2 in hand. Not really where you want to be with Shadow against anything, let alone a kind of combo-ish punish you deck. And then here I scoop because they put some big fatty card back in hand that they could cast. And that's all I need to see. We already talked about sideboarding against the other Eldrazi deck, so I won't go too much into that. Basically, exact same plan. It was kind of funny that I tried registering my deck early, removed myself from the event, re-entered, and it didn't register the Break the Ices. Then I run into Tron twice. Thankfully, I don't think this matchup is, like, the worst. Alright, Expedition map. I thought about countering this for a while and then decided not to because this Ugin's Labyrinth isn't a Tron land, so they're still ways off of Tron. And stick with the Hold My Guns, which I think paid off pretty well, especially since they had the second map. But now they can kind of like develop their lands pretty slowly, which is great for me because I'm just going to end the game in like 2 turns. Counter 1 ring, and now I've got Shock in a Watery Grave for lethal. And boom. On to game 3. You love to see it. Game 3, on the draw. Got Force Negation, Consign. I'm fine ditching Tamiyo to a Force if I need to. Same call as last game, like not leading on a Tron land, leading on an Ugin's Labyrinth and a map is a little less terrifying to me. So we'll just let that go. Now, in situations like this with Tamiyo, if I find a way to flip Tamiyo, especially like another Wraith, then I will. You know, like another Wraith, then I will. But if I had to pay the mana to flip Tamiyo, then I would rather just get the Shadow down. So if I found like a Preordain, I wouldn't flip the Tamiyo. I'd prioritize the Shadow, especially with the Force Negation backup. But because I found the free way of flipping Tamiyo, then getting that clock going as well is a pretty big deal. So Kozilek's command on my Shadow. Force Negation, really looking good in situations like this. Get my Shock land, start swinging in, ticking up Tamiyo. I guess we'll find out next turn. I can't remember if I kept that Sink into Stupor on top or not. Then be mana efficient, just flash in the Disruptor Flute. They're going to go ahead and crack the map, which is fine. I'm just going to name Karn the Great Creator. I've got Consigned to Memory to deal with any Eldrazi and the cast trigger. So didn't keep the Sink into Super on top, which is A-okay with me. I've got Consign. I've got a lethal attack next turn. Like, good luck. And I think they ended up scooping up there. Probably just found a couple more lands. Either way, up to 4-1 on to match number 6. It's looking like X1 will make top 8. X2 will make top 32. Obviously a really big disparity between those two. Leading off on Urza Saga, I would assume like Amulet Titan. So let's Thoughtseize and nope, Nadu. Okay, fair enough. So we know it's Nadu, which means our plan right now needs to be just get as aggressive as possible, get on the board, be proactive, get attacks in. They find a Shuko, but they don't find a Nadu or like another Pact or anything, so they just have to stop there, which means we get in a nice little attack, get another Shadow down. We're not going to play out Tamiyo. We're just going to hold up Force Negation because we know of Chord of Calling. So if they are able to find something and like Chord, then that would be frustrating. And Sink into Super lets us get in what will be a lethal attack if it weren't for a Chord of Calling for a Dryad Arbor. Oh, wait, we've got a Fatal Push. Let's use that. And on to game 2. That's one of the Nadu games that you really, really love to see. We're just like, oh, rip apart a couple Nadus or Nadus in the form of Pact Negations, or not Pact Negations, Summoner's Pact. Rip apart a few Nadus, present a proactive clock. Fetching out basic island here because I do want to be a little conservative. My life total, since I've got like 3 fetches, I've got Toxic Deluge. And it's got the Nadu off the Dryad Arbor, but I'm feeling super good after being able to just deluge away the Dryad Arbor and the Nadu here. So strip mine plus deal with their signature card. Well, second Nadu is a little worse for me. I could Thoughtseize, but I'd have to fetch and shock since I don't have a basic swamp in this list. I don't really want to do that, so I'll just hold up Stern Scolding. I'm doing this on my upkeep. This is important line to remember. I'm surveilling on my upkeep so that if I find a Fatal Push, I have Revolt the turn that I draw it. If I had surveilled at the end of my opponent's turn and saw a Fatal Push on top and went to my turn and drew it, I wouldn't have Revolt, wouldn't have a way of getting Revolt, so I wouldn't actually be able to deal with the Nadu. But because I cracked that fetch on my turn and surveilled, if I did like bend something, draw into a Fatal Push, or just draw into a Fatal Push naturally, I'd have the Revolt. Summoner's Pact for an Endurance. Pretty good. Unfortunately, Stern Scolding does not stop an Endurance. So they're going to eat the Nethergoy. If we play out Shadow, we do have the benefit of they can't play anything this turn because they got to pay for the Pact. But at the same time, like, our position isn't exactly better because we are just dead to the Nadu next turn and there's not a whole lot we can draw to stop it. And then this is just a Thoughtseize for information, see if there was some card I didn't know about. I wasn't actually expecting them to veil it, but either way, they veiled it. Now we know they have veil, if that matters for any purpose whatsoever. I would have assumed they had it anyway. But It doesn't hurt to check. On to game 3. Reasonable opening hand. We've got some interaction. We've got Toxic Deluge. I think we don't really talk enough about keys to matchups. I think with Nadu, the keys are 2 parts. One is keeping Nadu itself either off the board or locked under something like a Disruptor Flute on Shuko or Disruptor Flute on Nomads on Core or something to that effect. The second is don't let Springheart Nantuko get out of hand. Making a token or 2 is fine. Making an army of tokens is not only going to make it impossible for you to attack through, but it's also going to make it very difficult for you to keep up with them just suiciding tokens into you. So cards like Toxic Deluge really become a lot more important for keeping that aspect of the deck in check. Find a Thoughtseize. I'm not firing off the Thoughtseize here in case they've got Veil of Summer. I would rather wait for a turn that they like tap out and then I Thoughtseize immediately after, like if they play a 2-drop here or something. Or in this case, they play out the Urza Saga, which means I do have a window here to Thoughtseize if I want it. Because I drew the Tamiyo, I decided to just sit on Counterspell instead. That way I can start attacking with Tamiyo, getting a few more cards in hand. And this is obviously the fair Tamiyo, the Tamiyo not everybody thinks of. They're just like, I'm going to draw an extra card or 2 here and there, call it a day. Thoughtseize, we see a 1 ring, Summoner's Pact, and a Court of Calling. So they can get a Nadu next turn. Thankfully, we're God gamers and we draw into a counter spell. So now we've got Nadu covered. And I was really, really surprised to see them pack for the Nadu there. I'm honestly not 100% sure if they thought about their land sacking there. So me with my 2 open blue mana, if I just like have an answer to Nadu right now, you lose the game on the spot. Now, obviously, if my answer is a removal spell, say another Dismember, then you would get 2 Nadu triggers. You have a land in hand, you get a trigger off Shuko targeting Nadu for the equip, and you'd get a trigger off of Dismember targeting Nadu. So you could find a land probably 40% of the time, something like that. I don't know the exact number. But if I have a counter spell, then the game is just over on the spot, which is what it is here, because now they don't have the mana to pay for Pact on their next upkeep. And we're able to steal a win there. So we got lucky in the sense that we drew counterspell and got the deterministic win. But if we didn't have counterspell, we would have still been able to dismember the Nadu. They have to find land, which isn't like the worst hit for us. There's like a 60-ish% chance that they don't find a land, and we still just win. And even if they do find a win or find a land, we've got an active Tamiyo attacking, 2 more cards we can draw off of our clues. We still have a Toxic Deluge. So like we're still in a really good spot, even if they do get the triggers, find the land. So I don't want it being misconstrued as like, oh, we won because we got lucky in top deck to counter spell and that saved us. Like, no, we were still in a really, really good spot. It's just that drawing that counter spell happened to mean like the game is actually over right now instead of, oh, the game might be over next turn or something. Might be over in a couple turns. So We finally found another opponent that has embraced the power of Tamiyo. All power unto her. But instead of killing our beloved, we're going to take out a Dragon's Rage Channeler because I don't really want them filtering their draws. We'll deal with the Tamiyo eventually. Take out an iteration so we know that they've got 2 Unholy Heats in hand. I will go ahead and take out the Tamiyo now because they can't draw into a counter spell while the mana's tapped out. Boo. Boo. More Tamiyos. Keep that fetch land on top so that I can play out Shadow and outgrow outgrow Unholy Heat. Words are tough. Now, they probably should have drawn at the end of their turn there. I can understand maybe not flipping the Tamiyo, but I do think they should have drawn on their end step. Cracking a clue. Taking 9. So we know they've got an Unholy Heat, 3 unknowns. 1 heat alone is not enough to take out our Death Shadow. So we will counter the second one. Turns out their draws were 3rd Unholy Heat, counter spell. That's a little unfortunate, but we top deck another Shadow, so you know, primetime gamers here. Winning draws only, am I right? Crack a clue, pass the turn. Nethergoyf, really, really good pick up there. So even if they found another counter spell. So our 5/6 Nethergoyf gets countered and rebought as a 5/6 Nethergoyf. Always love to see that. Oh, Nethergoyf exiles 4 card types and shrinks itself. Or doesn't. One of the two. So, I didn't see anything that would make me believe this was Wizards instead of just straight blue-red Murktide. So, I'm going with that assumption until I see otherwise. Find a Shadow, keep a Preordain on top. So, I need to find removal spells for Tamiyo eventually. Your opponent does get to flip their Tamiyo on turn 2, and I'm a little mad about that because that's our thing, not their thing. Dash in a Ragavans, and now they can dash in Rag, hold up counter spell if they want. And now I've got Flusterstorm, Stubborn against an Unholy Heat. Okay, so I know that this is Dash Ragavan so that I block and they have enough damage on Shadow to Unholy Heat. Like, I get that idea. I should probably just let this go next time because, like, my deck is full of so many just dead counter spells and things like that that it's probably fine just taking this. But I ended up blocking with the plan of like countering the Unholy Heat, get the Ragavan out of the way. They did have to have another card type for Delirium, but a fetch land would have done it as well, so that wasn't a crazy thought. They've got the Unholy Heat, which would counter. And then I kind of forgot that they could just rebuy the Unholy Heat again with Tamiyo. I'm so used to Tamiyo ticking up that Tamiyo ticking down is just like a mystery to me. But they're able to find another way, or find another Unholy Heat with Tamiyo. Then rebuy the Unholy Heat again. Such a waste of a Tamiyo, am I right? I'm going to go for the Upkeep Heat. We'll go for the stub. They'll go for... Oh, they don't have counterspell. Oh well. We know they have expressive iteration, which is a little unfortunate. Really good card. I don't want to take 3 because they probably have lightning bolt somewhere in their deck, even if I haven't seen it yet. Murktide. Murktide. So in hindsight, if I had known I was drawing a Tamiyo, it probably would have been better to take the 3 off Channeler, hold up the Sink into Stupor to bounce the Murktide. Would have shrunk the Dragon's Rage Channeler to a 1/1, but I can't know that's how things are going to play out. So based on the information I did have, I think that bouncing the Dragon's Rage Channeler was right. And they just happen to have a Murktide. So on to game 3. No harm, no foul. That's why we got 3 games instead of 2. I didn't pull out the sideboard for game 2, but usually trimming on some Street Wraiths, maybe Fatal Push, or not Fatal Push, maybe Thoughtseize, maybe Drown in the Lock. Stern Scolding's coming in, Flusterstorm's coming in, Nihil Spellbomb's coming in. So, take a Channeler. I do leave them with a Blood Moon. My hope here is that I can just, like, get a board presence before Blood Moon comes down and not really worry about it. Like, hey, if you want to take your turn 3 off hard casting Blood Moon, then I'm just going to have a bunch of dudes on board and like swing in for 6 or 7 every turn. Which is exactly the plan here, but turns out they go for iteration instead of Blood Moon. Do pick up a Delirium to Unholy Heat. Pretty good. Tamiyo War, another Unholy Heat. So we know they've got Blood Moon and an Unknown. They played out that Steam Vents. Got Counterspell. I could hold up Counterspell for Blood Moon. I actually don't like this. I think that I should have just played out the Nethergoyf. I got kind of rewarded here for them playing out a Channeler and then Blood Moon. I got the Fatal Push and Counterspell. So maybe it was right to play the Fatal Push Counterspell line. Yeah, I'd buy into that. Now that the Blood Moon I know about is gone, I can just escape Nethergoyf. Yeah, I made the right play. Bolt away my Tamiyo, but that's okay because Tamiyo's already got a couple clues lined up for us. This is the fair side of Tamiyo, the 1 mana, draw 3 cards. And I get that people are going to say, oh, that like it's not draw 3 cards for 1 mana because you do have to spend that mana to crack the clues. But you get to spend it when you want to. And that's a really big deal. Like, I don't have to spend that mana on my turn. I can wait for an opportunity where my opponent's tapped out and then go for cracking the clues. That makes it a whole lot better. So just looking for another Drown, looking for a Sink into Stupor. Decide to keep a Tamiyo because it's a flying blocker. Opponent can't really attack in because if they do, they're just dead to the Nethergoyf on the ground. One card in hand. Another Nethergoyf is good. Now, if they attack with just the Channeler, I'm probably just letting it go. No reason to block with the Tamiyo. I've got to counter that or I'm dead in the skies, so pretty easy stub. Let the Channeler go, that way I can block again with the Tamiyo next turn if need be. But we find a Sink into Stupor for the dragon and swing in for lethal. I've been back and forth between like Sink into Stupor and Fell the Profane. Personally, I think Sink into Stupor has a lot more versatility. Not only is it a mana cheaper, which is actually a big deal, but being able to return uncounterable spells is nice, especially against Cavern of the Souls with Eldrazi, with Amulet Titan. So like returning a Titan to hand, pretty big deal. It's also really great against the Eldrazi decks when you want to bounce a Chalice of the Void or a Trinisphere or something like that in Snaring Bridge that Fell the Profane can't take care of. All right. So this is match number 7-ish. 7 sounds right. I think we're 5-1 at this point. Opening hand doesn't have black mana, but I do have a Tamiyo, and that could possibly mean a flip Tamiyo on turn 2. Now, naturally, it doesn't, but it could have. Really hoping for an amulet. No amulet. Got it. Just very aggressively slanted board of 1-drops. Play out the Nethergoy for the slightly bigger butt than the Shadow. Yeah, this is a draw out of Boros energy that we're not beating in a million years. Just turn 1, 1-drop, turn 2, double 1-drop, turn 3, 1-drop, 2-drop. Nope, you got it. We'll go to game 2. Even if I didn't stumble on my man, I'm not beating that. Guide of Souls just giving multiple things flying. So the Boros energy matchup is one that I think, been well documented in my struggles of. The combination of versatility that the deck presents is extraordinarily problematic. Like getting an under counter spell and then giving things flying, and like your 1-drop giving things flying and 1/1 counters. Flying's already tough to deal with. Pumping up all of these 1-drops is a pain because then they can spread out a lot of the damage instead of going all in on something. The 2-for-1s like Unstable Amulet, a Johnny, Flage to an extent, really nightmarish to deal with. And then the fact that you don't know what variation you're up against. So there's like 4 or 5 different energy variants. There's some that are heavy on the 1-drop plan with like Guide of Souls, Ocelot, Ranger Captain of Eos, that are just really good at presenting a low to the ground curve, bunch of aggressively slanted bodies that all kind of value off one another. There's energy heavy variants that are running like the Guide of Souls, Amped Raptor, Unstable Amulet, Static Prison. I mean, like 4 ofs, all these. There's mid-range variants that are more for Felia, for Fable of the Mirror Breaker, for Flage, that go a little bit bigger. There are the land destruction variants with Boom Bust, the Knight of White Orchid, or whatever knight it is, the 2-mana white one that flies and blows up a land. And then Felia and those. So sideboarding can be atrocious if you don't know exactly which variant you're up against. So like I'm assuming here that I'm up against the heavy 1-drop variant because I saw Guide of Souls and Ocelot Pride. Didn't see Ragavan, but doesn't mean they don't have it. Either way, this should be like Toxic Deluge is a must. And then that's caused a lot of these sorts of problems of, do I throw this hand back looking for Toxic Deluge, or do I say, I've got Thoughtseize, I've got Shadow, I've got a bunch of redraws. I hope I find it. Like, can I afford to throw back a good Shadow hand in the hopes that I find, like, a Toxic Deluge? So, we take a Guide of Souls. I probably should have Thoughtseized again here. Just Thoughtseize, maybe Shadow. But decided to go for the Preordain because I didn't really care about the Ocelot. I just need to kind of develop my mana, develop my life. Raptor exiles a Flage. Thankfully, they don't have the mana necessary to cast it. Still can't play out the Shadow because it's still dead to the Galvanic Discharge, which is huge pain. Push is a solid pickup. And I assume this attack is like attack in, plan on discharging the Shadow. But I don't really want to use up my push right now. So I'm going to save the push for kind of as long as I can. When I say as long as I can, I mean save it until the turn where I would be dead to a Lightning Bolt. And since I don't know if they run Lightning Bolt or not, I don't want to assume and then die to it. We got double discharge the Shadow just to get the energy, which is fine with me because hey, they go for another discharge and now I get to stub. Nuke the yard, just in the offset chance that I find another blue card and I can still hold up Forest. That would be pretty ideal. But maybe I could have found something else and not needed to stub. Either way, on to game 3. So, again, this is one of these hands of like, do I throw it back because it doesn't have Deluge? Do I have to mulligan aggressively for like a Fatal Push to answer a Guide of Souls? But then what if they don't have the Guide of Souls? That's what I usually get burned on is, oh, I'm going to mulligan for, I don't know, Toxic Deluge. And they just end up having like Unstable Amulet into Fable of the Mirror Breaker into Flage. And I look like an idiot. So, they've got a Flage in the yard. We're going to counter this Ranger Captain so they can't extend the board even more. Take away their Lightning Bolt. So now I can Nihil Spellbomb. I should have... I probably should have just played the Spell Bomb, cracked it, and drew a card, and not played out the Nethergoyf. Because, like, if my opponent finds a way to get energy, then the Nethergoyf doesn't matter anyway. It's not blocking. If they don't find an way to get energy, then I'm just taking one. So I'm, like, giving up this card draw for not actually mattering, you know what I mean? And turns out they do find an amulet, which would allow them the energy for flying if they wanted it. But here I could have had the Nethergoyf in hand already. I would have been one card deeper, which we'll see the irony eventually. Alright, so that Ajani right there was their draw for turn. They amuleted to find the Static Prison. Take out my Shadow, attack him with Guide of Souls. And... Alright, so I would have had the Flooded Strand, which didn't matter. So I didn't get punished for not drawing off that Nihil spell bomb, but I still think it was the right decision to draw off the spell bomb and not play out the Nethergoyf yet. Let's talk about this decision. This is kind of an odd one, and definitely hope people in the comment section can give some feedback so that I feel at least slightly more or less crazy. Okay, so I've got the Sink into Stupor. This Guide of Souls is going to kill me in 2 turns if I don't deal with it. I could attack in with the Nethergoyfs, and if my opponent is fairly predictable, they'll probably just throw the cat in front of one of the Nethergoyfs. Which means I would be attacking in for 4, putting them down to 10. They block a Nethergoyf, flip the Ajani, and now I'm staring down a Guide of Souls and an Ajani, which if they just attack, if they find a creature, attack, make a cat, I'm dead. I could Sink into Stupor the Ajani and attack him with the 2 Nethergoyfs. But then they're just recasting the Ajani and making another body next turn anyway. And that doesn't bode very well for me. I could attack in, see how they block, and then maybe Sink into Stupor the Guide of Souls. But that doesn't stop the Ajani problem if they just throw the cat in front of one of the Nethergoyfs. I could Sink into Stupor the Static Prison, but again, doesn't help with the Guide of Souls. Like, the Guide of Souls is going to kill me, but the issue I'm running into is I can't present lethal. So, like, if I Sink into Stupor the cat token, attack with my 2 Nethergoyfs, I'm putting them down to 8, or putting them down to 6 if they don't block. If they just put one blocker, like the Ajani, in front of one of the Nethergoyfs, then I'm dealing 4, putting them down to 10, and I'm not presenting lethal next turn. They're hitting me in the air for 3. I hit them down to 2. They kill me. So it becomes on to me to find something to deal with the guide. I end up taking that route because I'm like, oh, I could find a sorcery to grow the Nethergoyfs. I could find a creature. What am I missing? I've got sorcery and Thoughtseize. I could find a creature like a Street Wraith. I think I boarded all of them out. But yeah, I probably should have thought about my outs more. And I just like don't have many outs, which is unfortunate. So I think my out is like a removal spell for the Guide of Souls. Either way, attack them down to 10. I can't do anything about the Guide of Souls going unblocked. But the more I play the matchup, the more it's shifting towards the idea of the 2 things I need to win are keep Guide of Souls off the table, because they got a bunch of derpy little like on the ground creatures if they don't have Guide of Souls, and find a sweeper. Find a way to clear out everything, even if it's only once, and even if it's only like 3 dudes. Just clear the board, reset. Flage honestly doesn't scare me all that much. It's good. It's really good, but it doesn't... Flage doesn't beat me. Guide of Souls giving like 2 things flying and +2/+2 beats me. But either way, on to match number 9, 8. I think 9. I don't know. Looks like another Nadu. Which, good start for us if that's the case, because we just have Nethergoyf swinging in. We've got Fatal Push to answer something. Sink into Stupor to maybe bounce a Nadu back to hand. Slowly growing this Nethergoyf. But hey, a clock is a clock. Wall of Roots strapped up with a Shuko, so that gives us a Fatal Push target. I do want to make sure I'm Fatal Pushing this, because Wall of Roots really, really good with Chord of Calling. So I don't want them doubling up the mana there to potentially find a Nadu. But if I Fatal Push the wall, they can Chord for 0 and go get a Dryad Arbor, but I can kill that too. I'd be able to like drown into turn, go to my turn, hold up, sink into Stupor. And then here, decide to hold up the sink instead of going for the Nethergoyf in case my opponent did just like hard cast a Nadu right there. I'd have an answer for it. So let's get down some threats. Hold up sink. They go for the Nadu, which we immediately sink. So that means they do have to pay for Pact next turn, which makes this a lethal attack because they're going to take at least 2 from the Shadow. Go down to 1, and then they've got to tap their Waterlogged Grove to pay for Pact. So, good job there. On to game number 2. We've already talked about Nadu sideboarding. Basically, like, all your non-creature counter spells are coming out. Stubborn Denial, Force Negation, Drown in the Lock to an extent. And bringing in, like, your sweepers, bringing in Disruptor Flute. And it's got a Wall of Roots with a Shuko. I could Fatal Push the wall. I decided to pass the turn instead. Maybe I should have counterspelled that Nantuko. But I was really wanting to save the counterspell for Nadu. This is Fatal Push the wall to cut them back on mana a bit. Which might have been too greedy. There's the Nadu. Yeah, this kind of point in the game, the entire goal is just keep them off of Nadu. Like, I don't care about much else. Just don't let them resolve a Nadu. See a Volatile Storm Drake off the top of their deck. And then, yeah. They just happen to have another Nadu there. Decided to give them a few draws to see if they would go off. They ended up hitting another Nantuko like 2 cards later. And were able to just go off from there and found a... or one with a Thassa's Oracle, which I do think if you're wanting to play Nadu online, play the Thassa's Oracle. I get that they talked about on the Pro Tour of Thassa's Oracle being like the training wheels of Nadu, and that's fine for paper to not play it, but online with all the clicks, just play the Oracle in the game sooner. Don't start going through like endurance loops. Just get the game over with. You need the time. Or just don't play Nadu, because maybe ban. Game 3. Good opening hand. We've got a turn 1 Nethergoyf. We've got turn 2 Interaction. Taking out a Volatile Storm Drake. Got Fatal Push for an Nantuko. They do have a Nadu in hand, so we're basically never going to get to tap off of this counter spell. But we do have a growing Nethergoyf. Thoughtseize away in Endurance. Was really hoping they would Endurance, like, ditch the Nantuko right there. But opponent did not. Held true to their resolve. More Fatal Pushes. Not the most exciting draws in the world, but you gotta do what you gotta do. Does feel a lot better if opponents going all in on this construct plan instead of like playing out the Nadu or the Nantuko. I do have a reasonable clock here, assuming we hit for 4 this turn, counterspell something this turn, and then like we're forcing the chump block with the Nethergoyf next turn. But they do end up just having double Nantuko here. Which this is where like Toxic Deluge becomes so important. Disruptor Flute, really good pickup to stop the Shuko. I could have Disruptor Fluted naming Nadu to make it cost more. And definitely wouldn't fault anybody for that. My fear was if they just had a land in like a Court of Calling instead of actually hard casting the Nadu, they could have gotten around it that way. So I decided to wait for them to put something on the stack and then respond with the flute, which in this case we'll just name Shuko so they can't re-equip. And turns out they did have the Court of Calling, so Disruptor Flute naming Nadu would not have done it. Now they did have to cord for the Dryad Arbor, which gave them some extra blockers. And I definitely should have attacked last turn, but at this point, like, their board is a little too much for one lowly Nethergoyf to handle. I do not have any copies of Temur Battle Rage in the deck. Now, if they just right-click, attack all, we are dead. As such. But we tried. Nantuko is just a little bit much for us to deal with when we're trying to plow through some damage on the ground in the mid-game. Stern Scolding is definitely the best answer we have for that. But if we don't see the Stern Scolding, not much we can do about it. But either way, we finished up the Modern Qualifier 6-3. I ended up getting like 34th, 35th place, something like that. X2 went all the way down to like 33. So not getting top 32 is a little bit rough, especially for a full day of playing. But I do appreciate the fact that like we lost to Jeskai Control, one of the best decks in the format, and only really lost because we saw like Flusterstorm, Drown. What was it? Flusterstorm, Drown, and another conditional counter. Stubborn Denial, maybe. In the face of Flage, triple Flage game 3, plus Subtlety. Yeah, and the opponent's mana woes that ended up, I think, saving them again. So that was really funny. And then we lost to Bant Nadu, but we did beat Bant Nadu twice. So 2-1 record against Nadu. And then lost to Boros, which I will swear up and down is my worst matchup in the format, and it's not even close. So I'm not upset with the matchup spread. I'm not upset with how the deck performed. Just like a couple draws here and there from being X and 2. Honestly, a couple draws against Jeskai and a couple draws against that last Nadu match from being X and 1. And that's about all you can really ask for in a long tournament like that. So changes I would consider making. For one, I'm not a big Disruptor Flute fan. I was going to register it initially. Tried to take it back and register a different list. Didn't work out. But Disruptor Flute's not really my favorite card out there, especially as an answer to Nadu. So probably end up cutting those. Force Negation I really think has been overperforming. So I've loved Force. I could see cutting a Flusterstorm. I could see cutting a Deluge, because like Deluge is basically just there for Nadu and Boros, and if Nadu gets banned, then it's just Boros, and I don't want to devote a bunch of sideboard slots to a card that says, okay, if I see this, I win, or if I see this, I have a chance of winning. If I don't see this, I just auto lose. So why not just spend those slots on something else that might be a little more impactful? Either way, I absolutely love the deck. Having a blast playing it. Probably the most fun in Modern I've had in a while. Nethergoyf, Tamiyo. Tamiyo especially just gives the deck like a completely different axis to fight on that not everybody's prepared for, not everybody can interact with. So I'm all on board with that. But yeah, that's about all I got for today. Hope everybody enjoyed the video. As always, let me know what you thought. Let me know what's working for you, what's not working. Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, hope everybody has a fantastic rest of your day. Stay safe. Enjoy some good food and company. I'll catch y'all back live later. Adios for now.